So now I want to hear about the process of diagnosis and early detection of your cancer. So think back to the time when you first noticed something and talk us through what you noticed and how you got your diagnosis. So just kind of perhaps take it in turns to say.
I was suffering with something that was called thrush. I'd had it for about 15 years. I was tested for so many different diseases, and then I was finally referred to a dermatologist who picked up I had lichen sclerosis, which was a really horrible, uncomfortable condition, and it's very, very rare that it actually turns cancerous. And hey-ho, in my case, it did turn cancerous, and I kept having to have biopsies. And then it was when it's actually it was confirmed that it was cancer. I had to have a vulvectomy, which was physically really painful and uncomfortable, but psychologically it was bloody awful, basically. Because it really affected me psychologically, but luckily enough, because of my work that I do and the people I know, I got so much support, and I've got over it, both psychologically and physically.
Well, thinking back to the before you got the diagnosis, how were you feeling then?
Before I had because they thought I had thrush, and I was tested for different sexually transmitted diseases, which was like, hang on, I'm happily married, I'm not having affairs, my husband isn't having affairs. So there was humiliation for me, the fact of having to have those tests. And when they came back negative, I wanted to go and see the doctor and say, see, I told you so. He was a really good doctor, but it was just my perception on having to go through the humiliation of those tests. And then I was finally, as I say, referred to a dermatologist who was absolutely amazing.
My experience of what happened, we'd retired early in June of 2005 and life was great. My husband was well, I was well. But in the autumn of 2006, he started to just occasionally say to me, I don't think I'm emptying properly when I go to the loo, and God, I'm having to get up in the night, never used to do this sort of thing. Well, I knew about prostate cancer, so I said to him, maybe you should go to the doctor and get yourself tested. Well, he was a weeny bit reluctant, and if it hadn't been for one of our ancient cats who happened to bite his finger and it went septic, and he then did eventually go to the doctor, and I said to him, please, just tell him about the waterworks. So they sent him straight away in the October time of 2006 for blood and urine tests at our local hospital. And then we got a phone call to say they wanted him to go down for internal examination, and then they wanted to do biopsies. Well, at that stage I started to get a bit panicky, and I rang a girlfriend of mine who'd been a practice manager, and I said to her, I'm a bit frightened. Everything seems to be moving so quickly. And she said, well, if they think there's any risk of cancer, that's what they will do. So we're heading up to Christmas, mid-December, by the time he's having the biopsies done. And of course, everything goes dead at Christmas, doesn't it? So over to Christmas 2006, you go through the Christmas and pretending everything's okay, when actually you're living on a life edge, waiting to find out what the outcome's going to be. And we had an appointment on the 7th of January, and the consultant told us that on the Gleason scale, which is how they measure the results from the biopsies, Bob's was 9 and the top is 10. He had a PSA of 79, and the bottom started to drop out of my world fairly rapidly, and of his, of course.
When it happened, it was really quick, and I didn't realise I had anything wrong with me. I'm thinking actually back now to when the symptoms were really showing, and I suppose it would have been when I was at work. It felt like I was putting weight on. I thought it was that time of the month, and sorry. I remember I had a meeting to go to, and I apologised to my boss because I couldn't wear the smart clothes that I was normally wearing because my stomach was getting so swollen that I felt I had to wear baggy clothes just to make it more comfortable. So that was that. Another indication that something wasn't quite right was getting in and out of the car. I wasn't as flexible. I felt like I had like really bad backache or whatever. And then come the Christmas, I cooked Christmas dinner for the family. Didn't have an appetite myself, which generally happens when you cook something because you don't want to eat it anyway. But I just had a small plate and I couldn't even eat that. I was just full. And I remember standing by the bathroom, side on, and my daughter laughing at me. She said I looked like I was carrying twins because my stomach was that distended. But joking aside, I was at work one day and the pressure on my stomach had grown so much that I felt like I was going to explode. It was just awful. And my boss, she sent me up to A&E to get it checked out. So I really went in there to get some sort of relief for the pressure that I felt was building up inside my stomach. And initially I was prodded and poked, gave a blood sample, had a rectal examination, but the general conclusion was that I should eat more vegetables and do more exercise. Wasn't too impressed with that. I actually left the hospital very frustrated, still in pain and crying, but I was lucky. Just like the cat biting. And the consultant came after me for some reason, decided that he wanted to send me for a scan, an ultrasound, and the ultrasound showed that I wasn't full of gas, as they were implying, and that it was fluid, which turned out to be 9.5 litres of ascites fluid. And that's kind of when the alarm bell started ringing, and then they took more blood tests, were looking for something different, asked family history because I lost my mum to ovarian cancer. And that's kind of how it all kicked off, really.
My first symptom was aching arms, which seemed really insignificant. I didn't really put much emphasis on it at all. I'd been playing a lot of tennis, so I just thought maybe I'd overdone it on the tennis court. And it was intermittent, it wasn't constant, so it kept coming and going, and I really didn't feel unwell, wasn't particularly worried about it. I did think it was a bit odd after a few days because it was carrying on, and I can remember speaking to my mum about it, and she said, "Oh, maybe you better go to the doctor." And I just said, "Oh, what's the doctor going to say to me? They're just going to say, oh, you've overdone it, you've strained something." I just couldn't imagine that it was anything to worry about, and I couldn't imagine what the doctor was going to say to me. So I didn't book an appointment at that point. But then I spoke to my mum a few days later, and in the end I did book an appointment, but I booked it for about 3 weeks in advance. So there was from my point of view, there was no urgency. I didn't think there was anything wrong with me. I went on holiday, carried on going to work. But as the weeks went by, I think about 3 or 4 weeks had gone by this point, and I still had these aching arms, and it was beginning to keep me awake at night. So I was feeling a little bit, something was at the back of my head thinking, what is this? But I still wasn't particularly worried. Went on holiday, suddenly realised, it was a camping holiday, suddenly realised I was covered in bruises. But because we'd been camping and we were on it's a really awful campsite, really rocky ground, and I just assumed that it was that. So once again, I wasn't overly worried. Got back from holiday, went back to work, had a normal few days at work. Then my gum started to bleed. But I kind of call it a comedy of errors, really, because I phoned the dentist and said, "Oh, my gums are bleeding." And he said, "Don't worry, it's probably a bit of mild gum disease," because it could have quite easily been that. And it wasn't, they weren't bleeding that much. And then I went to the osteopath because my arms were aching. And he said, "Don't worry, you've probably just overdone it. I'm sure things will sort themselves out." And then eventually I went to my appointment at the GP, which I had booked several weeks ago. And I was really lucky, actually, because my GP is really fantastic and she's very experienced. And she knew instantly that there was something wrong, and she shipped me straight off to the hospital, told me to take an overnight bag. I still wasn't thinking that there was anything wrong with me, but she obviously knew. And she actually said to me at the time, if I'd seen one of the more junior doctors who I'd actually been due to see on that day. It was just out of luck that I got to see her, that they might have missed my symptoms because they were quite, the aching arms was quite rare. And it was only because she'd seen it before that she picked it up straight away. So I really was quite lucky, because by that point, even though I still didn't really feel unwell, I was really seriously quite unwell. So, yeah, and then I was in hospital for 6 months from that day.
There's 3 times now the word luck's come up.
Yeah.
And that's just people.
So I'm saying sort of different stories, and I wonder if there are kind of messages or kind of themes in the process of getting diagnosed that you guys have noticed.
I think persistence is you need to do, if you think, if there's even a tiny little niggling doubt in your head that something's wrong, you need to go and see someone and keep going back if you don't get an answer for what's wrong with you.
And for me, I'm an expert on my own body. If I know something's not right, I need to keep on until somebody will hear me.
Because we should know better than anyone else, shouldn't we, really, if something's
it's our
wrong.
bodies.